Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Meet the Team, where we're introducing the founders and leadership from Consortium 9, the makers of NOR. We're not just the makers, we're the architects of play. Anyway, today I have with me Jay Komas, who's our lawyer. You have a fancier title than that, but, TLDR is that you're the company attorney. Let me see. Let me refer to my notes. Head of business and legal. So last week we had Micah, who's the showrunner. So he's in charge of the lore and the writing team. And the week before that was Heather, who's the head of, she's not the head of business, but she's some
business operations.
Business operations. Yeah, we just work together. We don't pay attention to titles that much. But you and Heather work very closely together. She had mentioned that.
Definitely. When she did her episode. We work on a lot of stuff together. Yeah.
And because I forgot to introduce myself, I'm Val Massey. I'm the head of community. If you hang around in our Discord, and I hope you do, I'm 1.2 there. Anyway, so Jay.
Hi, Val. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where are you born? Where do you live now?
I was born in the Bay Area, born and raised in Sunnyvale, California. Kind of always grew up around startups, weirdly. Sort of part of the culture there. It's a little bit like the movie industry in LA, right? Everybody sort of thinks about startups here because that's sort of the cultural lore of the Valley. I actually went to the high school that both Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs went to. So that always was kind of ringing in my ears what those guys did. Obviously,
but not at the same time as them. I mean, they're considerably older than you.
Yeah. No, but they did influence us. They influenced us when it came to pranks that we pulled and things like that, because they were definitely pranksters. And we heard about that, and we pulled some stuff that you would not get away with today. I'll just say that.
Now, were they famous by the time you got there? So people knew who they were? Yeah. What were some of the good pranks that you did?
Well, we actually, this one would not have flown today. We were taking a class on sort of history, and it was a very intriguing class from a great teacher, a guy by the name of Roger Halstead, who I think to this day is still my favorite teacher. He was featured nationally on a bunch of PBS programs about great teachers. The guy was just spectacular. It was a class called War and Peace, and you looked at war and peace. And in the process, we came across the whole topic of terrorism. So we decided that we were going to take over a classroom with toy submachine guns and ski masks, which at the time was not that big of a deal, right? Everybody sort of laughed and had a laugh, and we had to get it. It would not have worked today in any way, shape, or form.
You'd be in prison today.
We would, if we made it out alive, right? So, that was clearly slightly different times when you think about effectively invading your own school with toy machine guns and having people go, well, that was hilarious. So,
so how did Steve Jobs influence that?
Well, they were notorious for having pulled a bunch of pranks, and they would switch I think one of the things they did was they switched all the it was like A building, B building, C building, and on the first day of school, I think they went in and switched all the letters, so that all the freshmen went to like. So that's awesome. Mass confusion, right? So,
all right. So you finished school. At what point did you say, you know what, I'm going to go to law school? Like, were you in fifth grade and like coloring something in his career day, and you're like, I'm gonna be that lawyer?
I think I just wanted to go into sort of business, and startups was the best thing I probably could come up with back when I was making a decision like that. And I think it really kind of came together after college when I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I finished up at UCLA and traveled across the country for a few months and kind of did that, sort of take some time and think about stuff, and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so, my family was always very into education, and, more education's better was kind of the mantra. And so I thought, well, I'll go to graduate school. And I wound up with law school because it was either that or management, and I just thought business school. And for whatever reason, I picked law. It was never like a calling. It was really just a path to hopefully to do cool things, to work in business and to work with, new ideas and, have an impact and, participate in an economy that was built around these startups doing innovative and exciting things. And so that is ultimately why I think the law worked for me, particularly in Silicon Valley, because I went to Santa Clara University. And so it was always kind of just part of the thinking. And so law was just a way to get into that.
in that environment where that would be kind of a natural progression. Okay. Yeah. I was curious because I thought, did you watch a lot of Perry Mason? Did you see a few good men? You're like, that Tom Cruise and that Kevin Bacon got it going on.
I was never that into the litigation side of things. I did a summer working at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and that was hard, right? They were splitting up families, and they were enforcing the law. That was their job to do it. But, sometimes you thought, well, is that the best answer in this scenario? And they're like, well, that's the only answer we have because our job is to prosecute these things. So you kind of had to carry forward with this whole mindset of, prosecuting criminals and putting them in jail regardless of the outcome. And I was, that was hard, and I didn't love that. And then I also thought, litigation is its own sort of beast, right? I mean, it's a thing. And if you're going to do trial work, I don't know that I could handle the stress on a regular basis. I think I would embrace it and enjoy it to a point, but I think the negative side effects of that, those highs and lows and the stress and, that's a hard job. I think that's a particular skill that, people have that not everybody has.
So what is one of the biggest challenges for you in the type of law that you practice, in the environment that you practice?
It's usually on the business side, to be honest with you. Well, there's a couple things. There's underlying all of what we're doing here are just the vagaries of crypto and the regulatory landscape that is yet to really emerge, and sort of all of those risks and things like that. So in a specific case, that's the biggest challenge I think we face right now. I mean, I'm thankful we've brought in, I think, probably as good a team of lawyers in the space. We work with a firm called Latham & Watkins, who I think are widely regarded as a top firm in the space. And I've actually known one of the guys there from my days back in private practice many years ago. And so we've stayed in touch over the years. And when we connected, I really, appreciated his whole approach to solving problems and supporting our efforts. So we're really focused on doing things the right way. And so from what's the biggest problem? It's at this point, it's navigating, the lack of regulatory framework to allow decision making. Now, I think we keep continuing to come up with the right answers. But it's also an evolving thought process where we're continuing to iterate with our legal team to make sure that we're, staying ahead of the regulatory risks and while still, making sure that we're creating a fun and compelling game. And thankfully, the two mostly go hand in hand in our thinking, right? Like we keep designing this game and the platform and the series of games that we're putting on that platform from the user's perspective and what their experience is going to be. And that goes through everything. So, so when we think about things like how the token plays into that, it's a critical piece to the in-game economy, and we don't want to create any sort of like regulatory risk for ourselves or, clunky, uncomfortable, painful touch points for the users. So we're all, we're really focused on doing those things the right way. And so we're continuing to iterate with our legal team on a regular basis to make sure we continue to do that.
That actually came up yesterday. We've been releasing our white paper incrementally, and yesterday's white paper drop was about tokenomics. Yeah. And, Brooks even went into Discord to kind of say, this probably isn't what you were expecting, but, we can't say more at this time, or we don't want to say more at this time for legal reasons. So it was very timely that you would be on today. Is there anything else that you feel like needs to be said or should be said around all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we continue to focus on building a great platform and series of games. And as part of that, what's a fundamental underpinning of all that we're doing is that in-game economy. And so what we're designing is a token for that in-game economy and a great game experience at the meta level, as well as on the individual game level, and how those two interwork. So that is a really key thing for us. And we want to continue to make sure that that's the best experience possible, while also obviously being compliant from a legal and a regulatory standpoint. So, I feel like we continue to iterate on that front, and we'll continue to reveal more as it becomes, kind of more crystallized in everybody's mind from a business perspective and a legal perspective. So over time, we will, continue to share the mechanics that implement this stuff. But for us, it's really about making that great in-game economy that's very dynamic, legally compliant, and done with the right mechanics in mind for the player's experience and for the overall performance of the platform. So, for us, that's a really core value of what we're trying to apply to what we build is, starting from the users and building something great for them. And so I think we're continuing to do that, and I'm sure that, we'll have more to reveal over time. But, for now, I think if people continue to think about it as a very robust in-game economy with all the features and functionality that you might think about in a sports industry, you'll be heading in the right direction. And then we'll reveal more mechanics as they become, solidified.
This is uncharted territory. So, largely, some days you must feel like Lewis or Clark, forging through the wilderness. Yeah. Definitely. Of course, there were people who lived there, and that's a whole other conversation.
Took care of that.
But they didn't, Lewis and Clark didn't know what they were doing. So,
right.
And you've got to navigate because, like you said, there are laws in existence. So it's not like you could just go in, okay, nobody's done this before, so we're going to make up all these rules. It's not like that. So how does it balance out the exciting and the scary? I hope it's more exciting than scary.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I think through my career as a lawyer and as kind of a business development type person, doing strategy and those kinds of things, I think what I've managed to get comfortable with that isn't necessarily part of the normal lawyer profile is being comfortable with the gray area, being comfortable with ambiguity and the lack of certainty. For some lawyers, I wouldn't say all, but for some lawyers, that's a very hard thing. They want to sort of lay it out and go, this is a good thing or it's a bad thing. Unfortunately, in business, you tend to land somewhere in the middle a lot of times. And so it reminds me kind of when I was, in law school, I had a professor who said, look, just first thing you don't do when you walk in here, do not check your common sense. It's going to get you farther than you think.
Yes.
Right. And I still remember that to this day. I don't remember actually the professor's name now that I think about it, but that message really stuck with me, and it holds true. It's not always the final answer on some things, but you're usually headed in the right direction if you go.
Don't you think that's just good advice for anybody? Like,
I think so. Yeah.
If you work at McDonald's, don't leave your common sense in the parking lot. That's some totally great advice.
And I think it makes sense in the legal field too, because a lot of times things can be a little bit sort of overwhelming. And, I think for a time it felt like lawyers sort of mystified this whole sort of behind the cloak, behind the curtain type, what we do, no one else can do. And it's so mysterious and dense and hard. To some degree, that's true. But at the same time, it all kind of comes back to common sense in a lot of ways and how we sort of apply rules to, relationships in society. So it still works, right? It shouldn't be mysterious to a lot of folks if they kind of look at it that way of just trying to solve problems of how people work together or don't. And, and keep sticking with your common sense. You're probably going to get pretty close to the right answer most times.
Okay. Let's talk about, you get your law degree, you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, heading out into the world. Let's talk about some of the places that you've worked, projects that you've worked on, leading up to when you met Brooks and how you wound up coming to C9.
Yeah, I started out in private practice worked at two big, well-known Silicon Valley law firms, and made a lot of great friends there and had a lot of great experiences. But I also learned that private practice wasn't really for me. It was, it's a great this proving ground where it's a little bit like hazing, where you just have to work your butt off 24/7. And if you survive, then good for you. You're one of us. It's hard. It's a hard gig. And I, as it turns out, it didn't feel like it was necessarily for me, but I was fortunate to work on a deal with EA, and we were their outside lawyers in the acquisition of a company called Maxis back in the day. They did SimCity, SimAnt, SimEarth, and ultimately The Sims.
Sims, yeah.
And so worked with the company on that. So kind of got a taste of what that business was like and what that world was like. And then conveniently enough, got a cold call from a recruiter who was recruiting for a job at EA. And so I ended up getting that job and started out at EA as an in-house lawyer working on acquisitions and investments and a couple different products, and So it's a great way to get into the industry, and things I've learned over the years that once you get into the industry, it's hard to get out, even if you wanted to, because you just kind of keep coming back to it. It's fun. It's cool. It's innovative. There's something new going on all the time. There's new problems to be solved every console cycle or as mobile evolves and, free to play games. There's always a problem to be solved there. And so I've, found myself kind of stumbling and bumbling through that as I learned how to be an in-house lawyer, and still credit a lot of the folks there with I think what I've, wound up with is a pretty good balance between the legal and business problem solving, and solving problems from the business perspective, but always keeping that legal framework in mind. People I worked with there kind of really helped cut my teeth and, teach me the ropes in that regard. From there, I went to Activision and that's probably my longest tenure. I was there for about 10 years, 11 years now that I think about it, and did a lot of stuff there. Worked in Europe with them. I worked in Europe with EA as well, but got to see the world, which was very, very cool. Spent 5 years as part of the management team for Activision in Europe, which is great. Got to know the Lucas people that way because we were distributing their products back then. And that was my next move after Activision was Lucas, where I had worked with them for a number of years on the distribution of Star Wars and other games in Europe. And so when they needed somebody to come in and head their business affairs team, that worked out well. So that's where I met Brooks. And I think to this day, probably doesn't much care for lawyers. Would be probably
no, but he has said that you are the only lawyer he ever liked.
Yeah.
I heard him say that.
He said that to me too. Yeah. It's, and partly we have a good friendship and a good relationship and get on well. So that's all great, which is remarkably true across the entire founding group and company as a whole. So that's still kind of blows my mind because that's not easy to do. But yeah, we got along really well. And then, Lucas was a notoriously hard place to get things done for a variety of reasons that aren't really going into, but it was a hard place to get products made or to get decisions made. It was just tough. We worked on a lot of games. We didn't release very many. And so it was a very challenging place to get stuff done. But Brooks and I headed off and, in the middle of that, I think it's a little bit like, you go through a difficult experience with somebody and you have a special bond.
Yes.
And I think, it's like, they always talk about, you go to war and the person in the trench next
together.
To you.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think,
Band of brothers.
The battle scars of trying to get stuff done in a difficult operating environment. I think we had a certain bond.
We have a question from the YouTube chat channel. How nervous do you get when Brooks answers questions during AMAs or Q&As?
Not at all. It's just part of the deal. There was a time, and I've been around long enough to recall this time when people speaking publicly or social media or any of those kinds of off the cuff type conversations, companies wouldn't allow it. Right. It was like, it's going to be terrible.
I've been the PR person that said, you keep your mouth shut. Yeah. I've been that
exactly.
person.
And what kind of work would it have taken back in that environment to have somebody, tweet freely about a product? So I've kind of grown up from an industry perspective in a world where it started out as just no one's talking about anything unless it's been vetted by a team of PR, communications, product, and management professionals. And now you've gotten comfortable with the idea that there's a conversation that needs to be had with your community and with your consumers, and that's just part of doing business. So it doesn't stress me out. If there were ever to be a problem, we fix it. I think so much of what we do isn't about having the right answer the first time. It's about how you react to something that doesn't go quite to plan, or maybe I was wrong and I shouldn't have said something, or maybe that was inaccurate or whatever. So how do you react to that situation rather than we can never say anything for fear of saying something wrong, right? The latter's never going to work, especially in today's, culture of sort of 24/7 communication. So, it doesn't bother me at all. And if there's an issue, we just, we tackle it. And, if we have to fix something, we fix it.
I said in Discord last night, one of the things that makes me really nervous is when I see @1, which is Brooks, is typing ... I was like, and I took a screenshot of it and I posted it in a Discord and I said, this is what makes me nervous because I never know what he's going to say.
Yeah.
So good for
Yeah.
you. I need to take some J lessons. I need to learn how not to get nervous when I see those little dots.
Well,
What
but
inspires
that's
you?
also one of the reasons
So-
that's also one of the reasons you're good at what you do. Is you're thinking about this
you're
stuff.
good at
right?
what you do. Yeah, mutual
There you go.
admiration there.
There we
Is
go.
to not,
Yeah.
you know, I get nervous about it, so you don't have to. What inspires
Exactly.
you? I see the guitar behind you, and I know you're really into music. So, like,
Yeah.
is there like
That's a
some
big-
kind of
big thing for me.
song, some kind of music you put on to get yourself jazzed up, or what do you play on your guitar? What's your favorite kind of music?
I'm mostly kind of a rock. I grew up in the Bay Area, so I was a big fan of the Grateful Dead. Went to my first Dead show when I think I was 14, something like that. My brother took me. My parents were pretty trusting, obviously. But yeah, so I'm sort of more of a rock fan. But I've learned to really appreciate just anything with great energy. I did a lot of work in the music industry when I was working with Activision in Europe. We worked on DJ Hero. I launched, actually led the launch of Guitar Hero in Europe. So we did a lot of fun music stuff that was really, really cool and exciting. And so I got to know a lot of different genres of music that I hadn't grown up listening to. So I kind of like anything with energy, right? So live music is great, whatever it is. And I think that'll always inspire me, and it definitely guides my mood. I think more broadly, I think of, new and interesting ideas and problems that haven't been solved and questions maybe that even haven't been figured out. They need to be asked. I like that kind of stuff. Just, new and interesting ideas, and new experiences really, really, really works for me. So, I think that's, when I think back on my career and I think about what NOR is, I've always kind of gravitated towards new and interesting things career-wise. Like I could still be at any one of the jobs that I've been at, but once it becomes familiar and maybe even a little comfortable, it kind of feels like time to go do something new. And so I've always sort of gravitated towards things like, when Brooks called up on this whole opportunity, I mean, it was, you had the same experience, right? We're like, oh my God, this is so cool. I have to do this. Fortunately, I was in a place where I could, so it worked out really well. But it's this kind of stuff that really inspires me.
Something totally new, yeah. Going back to Guitar Hero, I also play the guitar. And I find it difficult to play Guitar Hero because I know where the chord changes are. I know where your fingers are supposed to be. And a friend of mine's little boy kicked my ass at Guitar Hero when he was like 5. And he's going, you got beat by a 5-year-old. And I was like, because I know how to play guitar. Is it difficult for you? Or are you just... I got so frustrated. I just stopped.
You just started to think of it more as a rhythm game than as a guitar game, right? You're sort of playing along to beats and notes. And so, but we ran into that all the time, right? So people who were... we worked with a lot of artists, and so
Slash, didn't Slash,
Slash did a lot of stuff.
Rage Quit.
Absolutely, and the problem they ran into was exactly what you did, which was it's hard to pretend to play guitar when you're a guitarist and you have this plastic guitar in your hand that functions nothing like a guitar. So I guess the strumming's there to some degree, but even that's not right, because you're really trying to hit notes and beats. So you're not alone in that. And once you sort of think of it more as maybe more like a drum game where you're holding a guitar, then maybe you should revisit it with a drummer's mindset.
Yeah, maybe so. Okay, so back to the real world and your real job that you're doing now. What's your day-to-day like? What's a typical day? Or just a typical day for you. Yeah. Or typical week.
Part of why I love it is because it is so much, there's so much variety. I mean, there is a lot of kind of mundane legal stuff that is not breaking new ground, but just needs to be done in order to make sure the company, set up properly, options are approved, option plan, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of kind of that back office admin stuff. But the nice thing about that is it's rarely, urgent. Right. You get to that when you get to it. And so that means there's a lot of undone administrative stuff, but don't worry. It's all good. We'll get that stuff sorted out. On the more exciting side of things, it's, we're talking to investors. We're working on our second round right now. So there's a lot of conversations with a lot of interesting people about what we're doing and how we're doing it and why. That's a lot of fun. It does get a little bit repetitive because we do have to say the same things over and over and over again to all different people who would be willing to listen. But there's almost always something interesting about the conversation because these are, people who are curious about what we're doing and, interested in potentially investing in us. So that's always good. And then, there's all the other kinds of, it's surprising how much stuff comes up that isn't specifically a legal question that I think because of my background that I feel comfortable chiming in on, whether it's, what we're building and how we're building it and why we're building it. We have a lot of lively conversations around that. And I have a perspective on some of those things that I think is helpful. No one's told me to shut up yet. That's good. I'm sure it'll happen eventually. But, all the problems that you talk about with, like, there's so many questions you wouldn't anticipate that come up in the course of an ordinary day that I wouldn't even know how to categorize them. Like, why are we doing this? Or here's a problem we ran into, or we're talking to so-and-so and we didn't understand what the opportunity might look like. You're always trying to, there's no paint by numbers, right? There's no roadmap. There's no plan for a lot of this stuff as we're building it. We're defining the roadmap, the critical path towards launch every day. And so all the questions that come up with that are just, they're so wide and varied. I wouldn't even know how to categorize some of them other than we're just trying to build something really cool.
Because there's so much that you need to know going into it. And like you said, every day is a further learning experience. Is this career path something that you would recommend to other people? And if somebody said, I'm in college now, or I'm thinking about going back to college, this sounds interesting to me, would you encourage them to do that? And having the hindsight that you do now of this is how you got from point A to point B, what recommendations would you make to them about classes to take, things to read, stuff that you don't need to waste your time on? There's so much stuff. There was so much stuff in college that I'm just like, why are we doing this? I don't need this. I'm never going to use this.
Yeah. I mean, I think certainly for law school, I mean, while I didn't enjoy it and didn't much care for it, it did really drive home a certain sort of methodical and structured way to think and solve problems. And so while a lot of the content itself is stuff I haven't thought about since I took the class, little tidbits pop up here and there. We're like, oh, I understand why that works in property law, for example, or whatever. But I think it's really the thought process that it helps you refine and hone. And so you wind up being really good at breaking things down, hopefully, if you make it through law school and it doesn't drive you completely nutty. You get a good feel for solving problems in a methodical and thoughtful way where you're breaking things down and figuring things out. It's like you sort of take apart the radio and you put it back together. And so for somebody who's interested in this type of path, I actually think it's a great path for anybody who wants to be in business because you kind of have this immediate credibility. People are like, oh, they're a lawyer. They must know something. Well, point of fact, most lawyers don't know much of anything. They've just learned how to solve problems in a certain way. And that makes them really valuable to any business, right? Whether it's in a legal capacity or not. And if they've got an aptitude beyond law and interested in the way businesses are run and, business models and how to make money in a business. And, that I took a lot of business law classes. So I think that helped. I took a lot of tax classes, which is kind of weird, but it really kind of gives you a grounding for why certain things are done certain ways. And then some entrepreneurship type classes where you look at the startup environment, venture capital and things like that. And then underlying all of this would be intellectual property law. There's always something going on from a legal perspective in intellectual property in the video game world. Whether it's ownership of, whether it's copyrights, trademarks, licensing. I mean, we license a lot of content, both inbound and outbound. Because you're not always relying on your own content. You oftentimes have to get somebody else's. So I've worked on all the biggest licenses in the world, whether it's, Star Wars, James Bond, FIFA, all the, you name it, I've probably worked on it at some point or another. And so that, a grounding in intellectual property will really give somebody the ability, I think, to function intelligently in the game space.
And it seems to me like even if you aren't planning to pursue a legal career, if you're planning or want to someday start your own business, a lot of that would make sense to at least read some books, even if you don't take like formal classes for it. I need to pause here and say, Jay is not here to give legal advice. He cannot because legal reasons. So, offering some insights, offering some tips, not giving legal advice. I know to say this a lot because I watch Legal Eagle, a guy named Devin on YouTube, who's an actual practicing attorney. Have you seen him?
Yeah.
I love that
really
guy.
Good. Really good stuff.
So, but he says it all the time. This is not legal advice. But if I was going to give you legal advice, I'd say don't do that because it's dumb. Yeah, I love him.
Or
That's
career advice for that matter. What the hell do I know?
Well, you know what you've been through, and you know what worked for you and what didn't. Same thing with me. I just kind of stumbled into this career. But that brings up something else that I wanted to ask you. I often joke that the game industry is very incestuous. And if we had a theme song, it would be Dueling Banjos, which young folks may not get that reference. You'll have to Google it. But, it's not even, 6 degrees of separation. It's usually less than that. We all kind of know each other. That's certainly true of people who do what I do, community managers. Is there a community of legal people that you hang out with or consult? I mean, aside from the ones that you mentioned before that we actually work with, are there other people that are doing legal stuff for crypto and you have like a little community and you guys compare notes?
Yeah, there's a couple different things. I mean, one is I agree with you. The industry itself is actually for the number of zeros on the, total annual sales and however you want to measure the industry, it's remarkably small, right? So you really feel like a lot of people in the industry and not even just in your particular discipline, So I still feel like it's like this relatively small industry, and yet it's obviously ballooned quite meaningfully beyond what I ever could have imagined. So there's that. But then within the legal community or in the business community, there are a couple different groups. Like there's like a video game bar association, which is, if people are interested in video games and the law, that's an interesting place for, to look up contacts and networking. And, most people will talk forever about what they do. So, typically if you reach out to some of these folks, they'll tell you all about how they got where they are. So if somebody's interested in this stuff, that's a good avenue to pursue, both just networking, but also to get a better sense of what the job's like and, what opportunities are like out there. They are hard to get. It's very competitive. But
it used to be, if you wanted a job in the game industry, you just needed a buddy who worked at a game company and they needed to have like an empty chair. Yeah. And those days are long gone. So yes, networking and long Twitter, gone. As much as I hate it, I have to use it for work. Twitter is really good for that because you can follow people who do what you want to do or who are doing things that are of interest to you that you want to learn more about. Twitter makes that a lot easier than like stalking them on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I struggle. Yeah, I'm conflicted about Twitter. Actually, I'm not that conflicted about Twitter. I don't particularly care for it. It's and I think it's a lot of the stuff that is out there. I think one of the things I do struggle with on that is, there are a lot more meaningful conversations to be had with some of these industry groups. And so I agree with you. There are some interesting people to follow out there, but also a lot of times a lot of noise. So if you can weed out the noise, then great. But there's also a group that I'm a member of it's called Tech GC, and it's a pretty remarkable group of people, all general counsels, a lot of really fascinating people, and it's a great group that I've gotten immeasurable amounts of value from over the last couple of years by working with them, and they do events and conferences and all that stuff. So that's not specific to games, but it is sort of like a senior level legal community that is really, really cool to to just bounce ideas off of, get to know people. I mean, funnily enough, I went to one event and one of our potential partners in a particular area, I won't go into any details here, but ended up, I'm sitting there having dinner next to this guy. He's like, yeah, I'm going to be general counsel of this company starting on Monday. I was like, great. We're talking to him about working with blah, 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 blah. So, you never know who you're going to be sitting next to at one of these things.
You don't. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing about networking too. In groups that are kind of small and close knit, is you have to be as careful who you criticize as who you praise.
Yeah,
I've seen some of that
gets around fast.
Backfire before.
Yeah.
All right. Without giving legal advice, what are some of the most common mistakes that people make when it comes to contracts?
Wow. Geez, let's dig right in, huh?
Yeah. Well, we got 20 more minutes, buddy. We got to fill it up.
Geez. Well, we got to be able to do better than this.
No, I do think that it's really important. Like here's a for instance, is that a lot of us, and I include myself in this group, you see that end user license, you see the terms of service, and you're like, you know what?
Yeah.
I just want to play the game. I just want to do the thing, and you just blindly click it. Is that a really dumb idea, and we need to stop doing that?
I don't think so. I mean, what I think we need to do better is I think companies need to be better at saying, this is what this says and this is what this means, not just parading out 20 pages of, fine print and saying agree or disagree, agree or stop using our service. I think there's a lot of room there for companies to be better about communicating what they're saying and doing. So when I think about what a contract should do, it should be relatively easy to understand what's going on. And it's clearly not the case in a lot of these end user license agreements or privacy policies or things like that. So I'm a big proponent of, simplifying, standardizing, and communicating clearly what's going on there. And that's a long, slow process. I mean, for a long time, a lot of these agreements were so dense that even lawyers didn't want to deal with them. And over time, I think things have gotten less, certainly for me, right? Like I don't love the intellectual exercise of unraveling a contract. I want to know what it says, and I want to know what our obligations are and get on with my day. And so I think the idea of simplifying the process of understanding what's in there, whether it's, in a privacy policy or a terms of service or what have you, giving people bullet points that say, oh, okay, yeah, I get this. I see what I'm agreeing to, instead of, the way most are done. Certainly, I think within companies too, the contracts are getting a little more, structured and understandable rather than just dense paragraphs of run-on sentences. I hate that. That stuff drives me nuts. I don't draft that way, and I won't. Just get me. Yay. So when you think about a mistake in a contract, to me, a mistake is like run-on sentences, paragraphs without headers, huge blocks of text that, with tons of semicolons. That's just
word salad.
Horrible.
I hate word salad.
And I think that's like a job security thing for lawyers. It's like nobody can understand it unless you're talking to the person who wrote it or somebody who's going to spend hours and hours dissecting it. And that's just not efficient. And it doesn't have to be that way. So
we won't see that sort of thing with NOR, right? The NOR stuff will be done correctly.
I think so. I mean, I think, one of the challenges of things like the terms of service and privacy policies is they are complex. And there is a lot that goes into that, and a lot of thought goes into these. But, by working with the folks that we work with, one of the things you start to see is a certain amount of standardization of this is how it's done across different industries. So, when you say, should I click on this thing or shouldn't I, depending on who it is, obviously, but in certain industries that are, engaging good lawyers, you're going to see a lot of commonality across these things. So you're not going to be like, oh, this is completely different because it's a different company. A lot of times they're actually quite similar because they're all trying to capture the same ideas for people. So there's some amount of standardization I think is already happening there. And I think it's helpful.
Is it okay to copy and paste somebody else's terms of service and just replace the name of their company with yours? I
copy and paste,
have worked somewhere at some point where that was common.
Yeah, I mean, no, technically it's not okay. But if you're trying to solve those problems in a way that doesn't refer to other people having already solved them, then you're wasting people's time and money. So, if I always said, like, when somebody said, well, we're trying to build out this platform and we got to look at this privacy policy, there's going to be younger people accessing the platform. Well, go read Disney's stuff. There's Club Penguin and, all these, go read these folks. They've been doing it a long time. Roblox, go see how they're doing it. Don't cut and paste, because it's not a nice thing to do. And it's strictly speaking, not legal, but don't pretend you're solving a new problem that it's already been solved. Right. So look at that stuff and understand how they've tackled it and try and, and mirror their best practices. Right. There's a difference between copying and then, using best practices as inspiration and a framework for doing something well.
So paraphrasing is.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Right. I don't see why not.
That's not legal advice. Okay. And speaking and more, this is not legal advice, but if I was going to start my own company next week, what are I should be ready to prepare or steps that I need to take? Like a common thing that I've seen, I've run into this with startups that I've joined, is that nobody ever looked to see if the name of the company or the name of the product was already being used in some capacity to where if you Google, you're not going to be the first one that pops up in that Google search. Or if I go to YouTube and I put in the name of that project, it's not going to be the first one. There's like 5 other projects that are named, chocolate Snickers bar. Well, Snickers, but obviously you get what I mean. So what's just some easy first steps if somebody's about to strike out on their own, even not even necessarily crypto related, but just in general?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you make a really good, that's a great first step is the name even available? So what am I calling my company? What am I calling my product? The two don't have to obviously be the same. We're Consortium 9 and the product is NOR. But you definitely want to look into whether or not it's already being used, which is a little bit tough because unless you're creating a brand new word out of nowhere, like all the, cars that get introduced on a regular basis, unless you're creating your own brand new word, you're going to be using something else that's probably used somehow somewhere else. So you've got to kind of navigate that. And probably your best way to deal with that is to see if do your own work a little bit. And then you probably want to consult with somebody who can do like a more formal search. And there are trademark services and lawyers out there that are excellent at doing this stuff at relatively low cost. They know in order to help people out and get them started, they don't charge full rates for that kind of stuff. You can almost always get a deal on that stuff. And it also depends on sort of what the size of the business is. If you're starting a business in the venture world, that's a very different arrangement than if you're starting like a shop in your town, right? Those are two very different exercises. You will have to you will have to ask a lot of the same questions, like how do I want to structure this? Is it worth incorporating? Is it just going to be me and my partner, and then we'll do a partnership? There's a lot of different things that, from a structural standpoint, you'll just want to understand. What are the tax and business implications of structuring the business a certain way? It's almost always down to taxes. That's why a lot of this stuff gets done. So certain things are beneficial. Yeah. So I think the structure is a first one. The name thing that you're talking about that you mentioned is really important and worth spending some time on. Those are really the big things. It's not that complicated to just get something up and running, right? You could go out to a legal service to get a company incorporated, and you're off to the races. So it's not hugely complicated. I would say though, like I said, if you're starting a business that is intending to go into venture capital financing to get some funding from institutional and big name investors, there's also a pretty well-worn path for that too. That's not horribly expensive. You can work with one of the big law firms to get, the right capitalization in place and the right corporate documentation, and then just make sure that you're doing everything from a corporate and securities perspective correctly. But, get good advisors, I think, is probably another thing I would suggest, because you don't know everything, and you probably should, you should probably loop in people who do.
And get second opinions about those advisors. Don't just take it. Bob at the barbershop said his cousin Vinny is really smart about accounting stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely.
go to Yelp, read some reviews, do something, do some due diligence.
Well,
okay. Say what you were going to say. And then,
yeah, I was going to say, one of the funny things about a lot of this stuff is your network is always, it can be your strongest resource. So really ask around. But what is weird is I get a ton of questions about lawyers that I don't, hey, do you know a good personal injury lawyer? No, I don't. I don't work in that space. And so what's funny is certain lawyers, certain kinds of lawyers, but you don't know all kinds of lawyers. But I would just say your network is really something to really tap into at any point, because you're going to ask people that you respect for referrals to people that they respect.
Okay. We've got another 10 minutes or so. So let's talk about some fun stuff. I know that you are very into food and wine. I like some wines and beer. I like some wines. I'm not as persnickety about it as I probably should be. But what are some of your favorite pairings? My daughter and I took a pairings class at one of the local liquor stores, and that was a lot of fun. And I learned that there's definitely an effect that it has when you drink a certain kind of wine with a certain kind of food, and how it kind of changes things. So what are some of your favorite pairings?
It's funny. I don't spend a lot of time connecting those dots. I mean, I've enjoyed experiences where they put things very specifically together to get a certain reaction from your taste buds. And I love that. It's fascinating. But on a day-to-day basis, I drink what I like, and put it together with food that I like. And sometimes they pair well and sometimes they don't. So, I like that wine. I like that food. Hopefully they go well together. Well, it didn't work out as well. So, I won't do that next time. So I tend to be a little bit freeform about all that stuff. So I don't really spend a lot of time, I do have some friends who spend a lot of time on that, like friends in the wine industry. And so I rely on them a lot. I'll say like, hey, what do you think about this? Or do you know this winemaker? And, I'd like to visit their winery. Can you get, and they'll get you in for a behind the scenes look and that kind of stuff. But as far as food and pairings, I'm just not that sophisticated.
Just not. What are some of your favorite beers and wines then?
Definitely a Russian River Brewing Company fan. Hard not to be in this area. They do a lot of great, IPAs, which of course are sort of all the rage these days. There are some really good local breweries here, like Epidemic and Calicraft. I'm big fans of them. And so I'm also just big fans of going and trying stuff, right? Like go out to a fun new tasting room and get a flight of beers and just try new things. So I've always found that to be a lot of fun. And being close to Napa Valley and Sonoma Valley, we go wine tasting a lot. It's just a nice afternoon out, go sit in the sunshine and taste new wines. I mean, fantastic.
Have you ever been to the French Laundry?
I have.
Oh, so jealous. Some friends of mine went recently, and I'm so jealous. Yeah, there was an episode of one of Tony Bourdain's shows where he went. And Thomas Keller, because Bourdain was just notorious for smoking, Thomas Keller created a dessert. It was like a Marlboro cigarette ice cream that he made, where the cream had been infused with the tobacco. And the guys at the table were just blown away by it. And that's one of my bucket list things. Was it wonderful?
It was. Well, and you talk about pairings, right? They have a wine for every single step of the meal. And, that's one where you say, well, I'm happy to leave that to the professionals, finding the right connection, because it's pretty spectacular when they do it. Those folks know what they're doing. And when you get those flavors together, it's really, really fun. So it's
I tried
trust
pairing
the professionals there too.
I tried pairing Corona with my favorite potato chips, which are Munchos, and that didn't go well. No, it was bad.
That could be tough.
I blame the Corona. I've never drank Corona since because I got so sick from it. But that's how bougie I am.
Well, if we're talking highbrow. I mean, when I was a kid, I swore by Pepsi and Cheez-Its together. It's a great pairing.
You lost me at Pepsi. Okay, let's talk pets in our last few moments because you recently acquired a new cat who has an interesting origin story. So
yes, this cat was basically a rescue mom being fostered by a family with 2 dogs, a pig, and an alpaca llama. And so we have a relatively new puppy, about a year old, who is just a handful for other cats. And so we thought, well, let's get him a cat that can sort of bridge the gap, right? Because this cat was super comfortable with much larger animals. And so we brought him in, and Ziggy has been just a joy because he's hilarious, and kittens are awesome. And so that's fun. But
and he's very
super
fluffy. I hoped that he would make a cameo. But of course,
he's
now
such
that you
a
want him
handful.
here.
He's such a handful when he's climbing all over, he's chewing on the mic. It would just be too much of a distraction. So I said, no cat. So sadly, no visual aids, but he's a pretty awesome little dude, and he keeps the puppy in line, and they're becoming friends, and the other cats are starting to go, hey, that doesn't look so bad. So it seems to be working in the right direction, where we're hopefully going to have the menagerie all kind of hanging out together here before too long.
And you told me that he's actually helping the dog improve its appetite.
Yes.
So the dog has a renewed
very
interest
jealous
in its
dog.
food. Yeah.
Very jealous. Once the cat starts eating the dog's food, then the dog is suddenly very interested in whatever the cat's eating. Doesn't matter if it's cat food, dog food, doesn't matter. Suddenly,
maybe you could send me a picture of Ziggy later, and I can put it in Discord, since we didn't get to see him during the stream.
I will. We'll get you the whole family.
Group photo. I have enjoyed our talk today, and to learn all this cool stuff about you. And I am sure that people will appreciate the insight that you've shared. There's a little nugget here for everybody, I think. Even those who don't want to go to law school, maybe somebody was kind of on the fence, and now they're like, no, I think I'm good.
Yeah.
Or somebody who's trying to
decide,
was
I'd
like,
recommend
yes.
it.
Yeah.
But it can work.
and that, there are different kinds of law. It's not all about, I'm going to put all the bad guys in jail, or, I'm going to save all the people on death row who were unjustly accused. Those are very noble pursuits, but I couldn't do it.
Yeah, no, I think it's hard. And if you're ever curious about like what law can mean to a business career, I mean, look how many CEOs or senior level executives are former lawyers or still lawyers, but there's a lot of benefit from a legal degree. So even though I didn't particularly care for getting it, wasn't very much fun. It's a great foundation for a career. So,
and I know that I feel better knowing that you're part of our team, and that you've got our 6, if people get that reference. It's a military term. It means that they're watching your back. Like if you think about the clock.
We're working really hard to do things the right way. We're really working hard to make sure that we do it the right way. So I'm excited to be part of this, and really excited to see where it goes. You're
definitely classing up the joint. So good job, Brooks. Good job, buddy, wherever you are, bringing Jay on board.
And to be fair, it's a pretty low bar. I mean, it doesn't take much. I don't even get my food pairings. So,
Well, thanks again to people in YouTube chat
Val.
Are saying thank
Appreciate
you. While you're here at our YouTube, remember to subscribe, like the video, and we will be back next week with another episode of Meet the Team. Au revoir, sir. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Val. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.